I remember going to the doctors and the doctors saying, man, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing is killing you. And so
Mm.
it kind of just sent me home, right? For a week straight after that, like Jesus just sat down with me.
Welcome to the first ever episode of the Deep Blue Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Sember. Today, I am so excited. I get the honor and privilege of welcoming the first ever guest to the Deep Blue Podcast. He was the man who was my first pastor when God assigned me to go to Bible college in Colorado. And he inspired me by his faith, by his walk with Jesus, and by the relationship that I saw he had with his wife and with his kids. He's a man that I can truly say is a man after God's own heart. His name is Gavin Acree, and I'm so excited to be talking today with him, and we're going to be sharing about partnership with God. With that, Gavin, I want to welcome you to the podcast and give you a chance to introduce yourself as well.
Well, yeah, as as Andrew said, my name's Gavin Acree, and I am originally from Oklahoma area and have done a little bit of everything. Started churches, started some missions organizations, and just obviously had to help with those and things like that. Nothing that we do is by ourselves, but I have worked in ministry for a number of years, got to start a couple businesses. And so just have genuinely, I love that you started this off with saying we're going to talk about adventures with the Lord, because that's exactly how I would classify basically all of my experience would just be one adventure after another with Jesus, and I think that I can't imagine a better way to live.
Amen. I have to agree with you there. Before I knew the Lord, I was plodding along, trying to make my own path, and the adventure just got darker and darker and darker. And with the Lord, I feel like every time I learn to step out in faith, there's blessing and it's brighter. And sometimes the blessing is just deeper intimacy with Him. And so I'm really excited to talk about partnering with God to unpack a little bit of what the Lord has shown you. My first question for you is just what makes Gavin Gavin? What gets you super pumped and excited?
Um, I would say, yeah, I kind of touched on it even with the first adventure. Even when I do personality tests and things like that, the things that make me tick are things like that, exciting adventure, new things. I'm a forever learner, and so I really do enjoy digging into new things. Matter of fact, the more that I do the same thing over and over again, the harder it is for me to do it. So a little bit of that has driven me to in the entrepreneurial journey and things like that is, nothing that somebody hands you can ever be quite what you could come up with, right? And I think there's always a little bit of that, and I think that, obviously that comes from our Father, that is obviously the Creator, and so I just, and so we always want to come up with new ways to do things, even if it's just in our own head, right? And so I would say what makes me me is definitely the adventure of chasing down the will of God. Yeah.
Oh, amen. I love that. And I feel kind of a kindred spirit in the sense of my biggest need in anything that the Lord assigns me to do is variety. Is if there's
Yes.
different things and there's something to learn, then I'm all
Yes.
about it for as long as there's something to learn. On that topic of learning things, can you share with me just a little bit um, about your background and specifically your testimony of how you came to know the Lord?
Sure. Well, man, my you said variety. So this is a variety bag in itself too. So, I grew up, my family went to church, grew up kind of the Southern Baptist kind of background, Trinity Baptist kind of background, and so had a relationship. Matter of fact, like I had a relationship with Jesus. I didn't know it was Jesus, but like I had what it was called I called back then an imaginary friend and things like this, and it was a big deal. My parents knew about it, like all this thing, and it wasn't until later when I got to truly actually know Jesus. He was like, "Dude, you've known me like this whole time. Remember this, remember this, remember this." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like really?" And so obviously, so anyway, so we Jesus, my point of saying that is Jesus is cool, man. Regardless of where you're at, where you're from, The word is real when he says that he has made himself known to us. He may be in a form or in a face or in a sense, right? Because most of us don't even know who he
Mm,
really is until he presents himself to us and somebody says, "Hey, yeah, that's that." Right. And so like he's so faithful, right? That's of anything. And so my life is a story of his faithfulness. And so from that, like I really got connected with, I was very talented when it came to athletics. And so I played baseball all the way through college, and it really consumed my life, which, as such things do when you focus solely on things, right? And I actually remember even having this repetitive conversation because, like, again, I was not unaware of Jesus, right? He never left me alone, right? And so
mm.
and I remember having these conversations with him, and he'd be like, "Hey, am I first in your life?" And I would just be like, sorry, not right now." And what was, at least I remember, what you'll learn from talking with me is that Jesus and I have a very peculiar relationship, right? And so I've just been really honest with him my whole life. I felt like if he was God, then what was the point of lying to him, right? I mean, I'd lie to myself more than I'd lie to him. And so anyway, he always really made me seem like he honored that about our relationship, right? And he knew I mean, he knows all things, right? So he was just a matter of time for him. He's like, okay, cool. And so anyway, so I went through the whole thing. I ended up getting hurt through baseball and
Mm,
stepping back from that. Matter of fact, it was crazy. I actually remember my senior year. Oh, Jesus, man, he's so good and sneaky, right, and crafty about what he does. But I remember actually going. I actually had a pastor and his wife pray for me um, before I was going off to college. Matt, no, yeah, because I got
mm,
hurt, and while I was praying to get healed, and because I got kind of encountered Jesus when I was in high school, right? And so this whole time, so again, you'd asked about my journey of being saved. I would say that my salvation moment of seriousness will come later in college. But obviously, I was aware and around him.
mm.
And would I say, okay, I would say that yes, I said a prayer when I was probably, 8 or 9, and that sealed it because Jesus is good, right? But the rest of my life has been of coming up to awareness of what that meant in any kind of realness, right?
Yeah.
And I think that to me, at least in my journey, I kind of at first always envied people that had, like, I can tell you the date, I can tell you the time, I can tell you how my life changed in these 100 ways.
Hmm.
Um, I've always been envious of that, right? But mine was more of a lifetime of gradual understanding of what I did then and what that meant, and how good he was to accept that, right? Like, and how loving he was. And so, sorry,
No,
I'm
it's
rambling, but
just it's funny
I'm
that
trying to
you
give you
say
a
that.
picture, right? Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because I have the opposite testimony in terms of, I grew up around, I'd say, a legalistic version of Christianity, but I never even knew you could get born again, didn't know that was a thing. And so every time I thought about Jesus being on the cross, I felt tremendous guilt. I thought that was a declaration of how evil I was.
Yeah.
And that's probably what kept me from coming to the Lord. And so I went through some dark things at the end of my teenage years, depression and feeling suicidal and things like that. And I had a dramatic shift when I gave my life to Christ. But the funny thing was, it was so painful before that I'd say, until I learned a little bit more about how good God is and how he can cover a breadth of journeys and how he can reveal himself to be good in any journey. I was honestly jealous of the kind of stories, the kind of testimony that you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of funny how that's, you know,
It's always that way, right?
yeah, exactly.
But ultimately, what I love about, regardless of the testimony, right, is that
Hmm.
the key in the middle of it is Jesus and his faithfulness, man. And ultimately, he kept loving me until he won my heart. Because I would
Amen.
say, even through even through high school and those things like that. Obviously, losing losing baseball as a focus and as a
Mm,
goal in life, that wrecked me in college.
mm,
And so, I found myself, really struggling, and he health issues found itself right behind that, right?
mm.
And so anyway, so I found myself, I was under 100 pounds and
Wow.
not doing well, and so anyway, and stuff, self-inflicted stupidity, right? Just because of you lost focus, right? I mean, my life is a testimony of how important purpose is, and how important that purpose's grounding is, right?
Mm,
Because I would say it wasn't that Jesus didn't give me the skills and the ability to play baseball, right? But he also gave me the choice of how I do it, right? And seeds suck sometimes, right? So they're a
Can you
real thing.
can you unpack that? Because I feel like you just said a nugget and I don't want to miss it. What do you
Sure.
mean by the grounding behind purpose?
So I would say that, my whole life, I would say I had purpose because I had focus, and even that focus, even to a point that it made me choose. It directed my choices. And
Mm,
for a matter of fact, those were, for most of those times, appear to be healthy in the sense that they were obviously very physical, very active, very regimented, very structured, right? But what you find is that what I found in that was that when you get to the point to where those go away, and there's always got to be something behind it. And
mm,
what I've found is that anything that's man-made, or anything that I've come to create in my own world, even if it's just a goal or a situation or a thought, a picture, that's a really hard one for me, a
mm.
picture of a situation, how something's supposed to go, right? Um,
Yeah.
when Because the ultimate thing about it, Jesus, is that regardless of what anybody says about him, when I dig to the very core of who I am, I have
Mhm.
my own, I have my own emotions. I have my own real interactions with him that no one can take away from me. It doesn't matter what you
Mm.
say you find or not. Like, I know that I've had a real interaction with him. And ultimately, when the purpose of like baseball and things like that, when that was uncovered or dug up, right? I found it wanting. I was still wanting. There was nothing for me, right? But when I find my purpose in the will of God and His call and His purpose for my life, I can't get to the bottom of it to dig it up.
Ah,
This is kind of what I would say about that.
wow. Man, that's so good. So with that, you kind of painted this picture of you met the Lord, and it sounds like you heard his voice and you knew that you heard his voice along this journey and you had a very honest relationship with him, which I think is fantastic. Some of the best moments I've had with the Lord came right after I said some unchurch-worthy words. But at least
Sure.
I chose to address them to him and not just collapse in on myself and ask him for help. But what was that moment where those things kind of shifted in your heart from, Jesus, you're here with me, to, okay, you're the most important part of my life. I'm going to lay aside baseball, anything else, and seek your purpose, seek your will.
So I would, a lot of people see these things as miracle and things that they would want. I see them as kind of not a mark of shame, because he certainly doesn't give us those, but in my own sense, like,
Mm.
obviously, as you said, I hear you say those things, and I hear obstinance all over myself, right? Like, like I was just, like resisting him the whole way, and I was, and so it's an accurate statement. But what I found is that when I got sick in college, and I found myself, I mean, literally, like, not able to get off of the couch and out of the bed, kind of thing. I remember going to the doctors, and the doctors saying, "Man, I don't know what you're doing, and I'm not here to talk to you about your life choices or anything like that, but whatever you're doing is killing you,
Wow.
and so it's up to you if you want to make a different choice." And so
Mm.
and kind of just sent me home, right? And so I remember, for a week straight after that, like, Jesus just sat down with me, man, and like, everybody always wants to know, like, was he physically there? Dude, I don't know, man. Like I was so sick that all I know is that, again, I'm talking about those interactions that no one can take away from me. He was there completely. Whatever that means is what it was. Because he sat with me straight for like every day. I mean, there were some interactions in that time with my wife where just even like just transparency, that like that oneness that he talks about of flesh. Like I just feel like we had some of those moments to where like and I'm really not even a hyper spiritual, hyper kooky person when it comes to these things. Can do all these things that he wants to do, and that's awesome. It's just not
Mhm.
necessarily my experience. But I can tell you, like, we had some really powerful moments in those times that like were just totally him. And that,
Mm.
man, we hear it all the time. The presence of the Lord changes you.
Mm.
And it's a reality. Like, I mean, if you think about who he is, and I think that that's what we're here to talk about, right? But we're talking
Yeah.
about the creator of the universe, the entire embodiment of who power and authority and love and justice and all of these things are, right? These things that when we think about their term, when we define them, it's like bigger than a term can name, right?
Mm.
And he embodies all of those things, right? And so when he shows up, of course things change. How could they not, right?
Mm.
And so I would say that what changed my life was a very real encounter for Jesus that lasted about 4 or 5 days. And again, I couldn't go anywhere else. So I mean, he had my full attention, and and I remember, like, you would think that I'm not going to tell you that that was a hyper spiritual experience. That was him spending those moments to convince me that he loved me.
Mm.
Now, again, see the conversation we just had about who he is, and he's at my couch, my bedside, to tell me this so that I don't give up, and so that I'm it. Those type of things again
Mm.
change you, right? And so now every day is more, what'd you do with what I gave you?
Man,
Because
I love what you just shared because I think a lot of people pursue God's will as opposed to pursuing his heart. And they don't realize that his first goal is to give you revelation that he loves you before he ever gives you purpose. And then I see so many people in myself, I've done this where all of a sudden he gives me purpose and then I run off to go do the thing and leave him behind. And he's like, I only gave you purpose so I could reveal more of myself as we partnered to do that thing together. So I
yeah,
love that powerful image. And, I'm never going to, one of the things that I feel like God has shown me is he can do whatever he wants to do. In the realm, obviously, of the limits he's set for himself in his word.
yeah,
But, you know, I've had I've had moments where I felt like Jesus just stepped into the room. Did I see him there physically? No, but sort of. But so I don't know.
yeah,
But he did what he wanted to do.
exactly.
And he wants us to have that. And what I guess my question would be, is there something that you learned about him or something maybe that he said in that moment that helped draw your heart to him?
Man, for me, I can't really pinpoint the moment, but I think as I look back at it now, I think what really won my heart was the fact, because again, think about, again, we're talking about the creator of everything that is and anything that isn't that we don't know, right? Like, I mean, like, literally the
Amen.
the
It's a
main
big
the main
universe.
guy of everything that and so I just always think about this, like, so a king got off of his throne to come to a pauper's bedside to convince him to fight for his life. That's just a big deal. And so I think because to me, I would say this, and why that was important to me, I think maybe may help define what you're asking for. Is that a lot of my life was seeing one thing and hearing hearing one thing and seeing another, right?
Mm.
As long as it looked good, it didn't matter what it was behind that. It was all about a front, right, and putting on a mask and things like that.
Mm.
And so to see somebody, obviously, the authority that he carries with his presence, you're not questioning who he is. But so to see that he truly cared, I think
Mm.
man, I think for so many of us, the cross is so distant, and that sucks, man, to say, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for the language of that, but it does. But I mean, it seems so distant from us.
Mm.
And so I think when we have real interaction that says that that he shows you why he did it, and like, hey, I'll come down here and make and convince you of who I am and how much I love you. And I think anybody that's willing to do that, I think at that, especially at that point in my life, when people, what a lot of people don't know about the athletics, and maybe at this point they do. There's a lot of documentaries about it, but you're really just a piece of meat. You're really only as good as your last performance, and how much that's going to make them on the next performance, right?
Mm.
It's business. It's just the way it is. That's
Yeah.
not a bash on it, right? It's just the process.
Mm.
And so when you're in it, you don't consider that to be the reality, right? I'm going to be okay. I'm always going to. So
Yeah.
when the reality of life sets in, and one of the things throughout my life I've learned is that when you look to men, you're going to get what men will give you, and that's disappointment. That's all that men can give you. That's why Solomon, wrote everything that he wrote, right? Was to say, hey, get over the sun, stop looking at men, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I would say that was a lot of my journey as well, was realizing that, hey, and that even ties back into the purpose. Where does purpose come from, right?
So, man, I I feel like there's just so much heart behind what you're sharing, and I can tell, uh, just the way the Pharisees responded to the disciples after they healed the man at the temple and said they can tell they've been with Jesus. That's what I see all over you,
I
as I can
appreciate that.
tell. And maybe I need to flip it around. I can tell Jesus has been with you.
Yeah, amen,
But then
man.
you've made
I'll
that
say
choice
that.
to be with him too, because he doesn't push himself, but it's always that open door, that open invitation. So, what would you say, um, as somebody who's walked through that door, that invitation to the Lord? I believe there's going to be people listening to this that are anywhere on the fence, either some that maybe they've met the Lord, they've grown cold or let their heart grown cold in relationship
Sure.
with the Lord, and maybe some others that haven't fully surrendered their life to Jesus or haven't even had that moment of accepting Him as Lord. What would your encouragement be to them? What would your heart invitation to them be, saying, open
Yeah.
the door?
I would break that into two. I would say two things to two different groups of people, and one of those
Okay.
groups would be disappointment and people where I've been later in my life. The first group I would speak to would be those that have when they hear me speak of the adventures that I've had with Jesus, and if their first thought is that's not real, or that I can't even imagine that being real, or that's not my experience, or that's not the Jesus I know. What I would say to that is, have you ever asked him to show you any of those things? Have you ever, like, again, he said, so remember, that's why I love Jesus. He said, if and forgive my pun in this, but he said, if you can even muster up the amount of a mustard seed of faith, he'll respond. Like it's how it works in his kingdom. And so I would say that first mustard seed would just be to, Jesus is fine. He's going to be fine. I know he's fine with it. It's just dare him to move, like dare him to show you who he is. And I don't mean challenge him. I'm not talking about like pride and things like that. But if you really don't know that Jesus is real, if it's just been something that somebody else has said, if you don't
Mhm.
have these tangible moments that are real, then I would just ask him for one.
Yeah.
That's where I'm bold enough to do those things where I'm just like, okay, well then let's put it out there. Like, is it real or is it not? Again, I say these things because I know that he is a parent, he's a dad
Mm.
that's doing everything that he can to talk to his kids. He's it's not about rules. It's not about all these things that we think it's about. It's not about these invisible lines about who God can talk to and can't. It's a dad trying to find every way that he can to talk to his kids. And I can promise you, if you'll just respond in that, then you're going to be amazed. I want to hear the stories, right? And then I would to the second group that I would say is that life sucks. It's real. And I don't mean life as in Jesus. I mean this world and what it calls life is hard and real. And disappointment is probably the biggest thing that the enemy uses to hinder, to cripple, and to just set us down, man. And so to that group, I would say to if you the content of your prayers aren't big enough to ask for the sun to stand still, then reevaluate where you're at. And then I would say do the same thing that I told the first group. Ask for something daring. I mean, how else do you see the sun stand still if you don't ask, right? And if he'll do that for them, what would he do for us? And if we don't have the audacity or the faith, right, the boldness to ask for at least what we've seen him do before, how could we say we're going to see him do greater things?
Wow. Man, that's amazing. So after Jesus has revealed himself to you on your journey, um, I know he's invited you into some big adventures. So I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit and
Sure.
talk about what are some of those adventures, and specifically adventures that involved other people, whether it's building a business or ministry or bringing, you know, reaching people. But what are some of those adventures that the Lord has invited you to partner with him? And then, so what are those adventures, and what are the things that he started to show you about
Sure.
himself as he invited you on those adventures?
Wow. So again, theme of my life is kind of been adventures with him, and I'll kind of hit these kind of light because like there's so much like in obviously when you the more you ponder the things in interaction. This is why sorry rambling. This is why I love hanging out with Jesus so much is because it isn't just the moment and the adventure in the moment that you get to experience. It's the lifetime of like going back and thinking about it and him showing you all the other things that he was doing during that time and setting up and things like that. And so I really enjoy these conversations because they continue to reveal the faithfulness of the Lord as I go through them. And so um, I have I have a very bold testimony when it comes to following and pursuing His will. And my wife can attest to that, is for sure. I think my first mission trip that I went on was with and this is before businesses and things like that. This is really my first launch into it. I was driving across Texas from one job to another, and as you know, that can, for those of you that are familiar with Texas, that can be a day by itself, right? And so a lot of windshield time, and so predominantly that's just great time to either listen, to sing, to pray, to do things like that. And so anyway, so I had been praying and things like that, and I literally the Lord just dropped one word in my heart, clear as day, like so clear that I just couldn't ignore it, and He just said hungry, and I'm like, what does that mean? And so anyway, I didn't do anything crazy. I prayed for it for a week, and I did all the tests and all these things like that. And I just, it was just burning, and you just couldn't put it away. And so my first trip, long story short, was, a matter of fact, we even tried to, my buddy and I went, and we even tried to fast for like 3 days before to get what the Lord's telling us to go do. And what's this mission? What's this all about? And finally, the Lord's just like, just chill, man. Like, I'll tell you when you get there. Just, you're gonna obey, Um, and so finally, he didn't tell us a word. He didn't give us anything until we stepped foot on hungry soil. And then we got there. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was incredible. Like
I'll be
he
honest,
led
when you
us.
first said hungry, I thought hungry for the word, hungry for something. I didn't realize you meant the country. He just
Yeah.
gave you a country name. That's it?
Yeah. I should have elaborated a little bit. So I went through that was part of my praying process. So
Okay.
are you telling me that I'm hungry? Like, that I need to be hungrier for you? Like, are you telling me like, is there something I even like Google, like, is there something going on in Hungary? Like trying to figure out and ultimately he wouldn't tell me until I went. And and so anyway, but again, I would say that, and I would pause to say this is that one thing Jesus is faithful to answer the prayers that he knows you need, right? We aren't as Let me say it this way. Maybe let me rearrange and say this. We aren't as good at remembering at the prayers we should have prayed as he is at keeping them, right? Um, and so again, like these are all things I were praying for. So let me say that. Because for those of you that that hear this and are thinking, like I'm just new to this and I don't want to be like torn around and yanked and told that I'm going to go across the world. So like that's my journey. That was my heart. Like he knew that's what made me tick. That's what was going to make me hungrier for where I am now. It's for what I do now, and things like that. And so I want to stop and just pause and say that just because you hear a crazy, adventure-filled experience coming from me, doesn't mean that that is always everybody's experience. And if you hear that and then you heard that statement and your heart just dropped, right? Then I'm not talking about you. Your heart is still excited about this. That's what we're talking about you, okay? I just was always that person, right? I would hear one and then hear, like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not that. And it's like I just want to make sure people know that like Jesus, what's so good about Jesus is he knows it. He made you, he formed you, he knows he says that he hid things in you for you. And so all these adventures and things like that look different for everybody, but the purpose is the same, is to uncover who you are and who he made you to be and all those gifts and all those treasures that he hid inside you. He said he hid his treasure in clay pots, right? That's us, clay vessels,
Mhm.
right? And so his goal is just looking through his treasure, man, and seeing that you see how much of a treasure that you are. And so for me, it's this. Like every time I think of Jesus to this day, when I picture him in my head, he has blazing eyes and a bright smile, man. And he just it's just adventure ready, right? And so, but again, if that's not you, man, that's cool. Your adventures are going to be just as exciting. They're just going to be different. And so yeah, so
And
give
I
you some
love that. I
highlights.
appreciate that you helped clarify because I feel like it's easy to unfortunately compare ourselves and compare our journeys with the Lord. I just want to probably add one word to your
Please.
word of encouragement is just that I've found some of the sweetest adventures can be in the mundane. And so
Absolutely.
there's the big bold things. There's the I'm going to fly halfway across the world because I know God told me to. And please don't unless you know. You have to
Yeah.
know that you heard his voice and be stepping out on faith. But then also even like I've had jobs that were the same every day, the 9 to 5 and back to back to back meetings that were all talking about the same thing, where I've invited the Lord in and he's wrecked me as I was walking from one meeting to another meeting, just with this mind blowing revelation about what most people would find boring. And I
Yeah.
found that, you know, God is so good and he's so vast and he knows us so well. I love that you said that concept of he hides things in us for
Yeah.
us, because the more we discover him, the more we discover who we are, and the more we uncover the things that we love to do, the things
Yeah.
that make us tick, that we're uniquely wired for.
That's it. And that's to me, that is. that is the beauty of the partnership that we're talking about, right? Regardless of whether it's business, whether it's ministry, whether it's school. I mean, it really, and that's the whole thing that he's trying to get us to understand about the relationship with him, right? Is that he really is just your biggest fan.
Hmm.
Like he really is, and like he just really we live in a world that just can't fathom that somebody loves us that much, that genuinely like
Yeah.
sees everything about us, knows all of our stuff, and just still is like, yes, and I want to spend every minute that you'll give me with you. And it's not
Hmm.
weird, they're not creepy, like it's genuinely a cool person, right? Like we don't have a comparison for that in our world. And so it really does hinder us when that is who he is, right? Like he really is that.
Hmm.
Um, and so anyway, so it's always an adventure with him, regardless of how it is. Matter of fact, I would also just use it as a caveat to what you said. Just to be clear, 90% of my life is mundane. Like I just make sure to ask for as much of this craziness as possible, and he's faithful.
Well, isn't it in a way though, isn't it kind of like marriage where you might have anniversary trips that are a highlight, or you might have moments, a date that's really memorable, you take pictures and you think back on it for years, but the intimacy is in the day to day.
Yeah,
And it's as meaningful and it's as close, it's as real as we choose to make it.
that's exactly right. Again, choices. Life is full of choices. And that's not me, that's him, right? He tells us
Mhm.
that every day I put before you, right? There's choices, choices, choices. And ultimately what I've learned about him is, and again, this is just confirming his word, but just what I've found by, again, the boldness enough to test his word. And I don't
Mhm.
mean that again in a testing sense, in the sense of that I'm challenging it, but here, let me let everybody in on a secret. If you are, he's big enough. Okay. Like he straightens my heart out every day. I promise you, he'll straighten yours out too. Like, just come to him, right? Like, just test it, right? But ultimately, what he said that if we'll follow his word, these things, certain things happen. So again, even if we're talking about building a life, and so a life is so much about positioning. And what
Mhm.
his word allows us to do is allow us ourselves by repetition and continue, and then again choices to put ourselves in place where it isn't by our best judgment that it's going to catch the most rain, so to speak, or the most blessings. It isn't by our thoughts or our estimations or any of the formulas that we can put together, but instead, he literally is telling us from his perspective and all perspectives, here's where the rain's going to fall.
Mhm.
So if you'll go stand here, you'll get wet, right? So much of what I've learned is just, and again, pairing that with a relationship that we're talking about, because the word by itself is just formulas. It seems formulaic, right? And we know that that doesn't work either. We've all tried that, right? But when I pair that with who he is and who he's showing me I am on a daily basis, then now I see that these things work. And now, above all else, I'm a pragmatist when it comes to I like things to work, like, in the sense that if I'm going to do something, if especially if there's something that says if A plus B is going to equal C, well then yeah, if you show me that that's what's going to happen every time, that's an easy decision. Um, the relationship just shows me how real it is and who he is, right? So I don't seek him for the blessing. What I find is that the more that I seek him, the more that above all else, I don't know about anybody else listening to this, my biggest pursuit is who am I?
Mhm.
Like, who, if somebody created me, then they know who I am. They know exactly what I'm made to be and what I'm supposed to do here. And I don't know about y'all, but I, I'm kind of a purpose driven person. And so like if I don't have a purpose, I mean, I want to have a purpose. I want to accomplish it. And it's not just a selfish thing. Like I want to accomplish things for others. I love to serve people. I
Mhm.
love to see things be built, right? And so like this process that when you see it working with him, man, like it just, why else would you pursue him?
Wow. I hope you guys got as much from that first podcast with Gavin as I did. I hate to have to cut it off, but I split the interview into two different podcasts. The second one, I get a chance to ask Gavin some specific things about how he walks out relationship with Jesus, specifically in business and in building an organization. I'm really excited to be able to release that to you guys as well. I encourage you, like this video, comment, subscribe, follow on whatever podcasting platform you caught this so you can make sure that you catch the next video. And I'll see you guys there.